Hello, Rebekah.
Hi.
How are you?
Doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing well.
I'm not falling for your
You
tricks.
don't have to. Fine was a good answer. We already went over this. Saying good is incorrect, but saying fine is fine. Because fine's not good. It's not great, but it's fine.
It's fine.
You put it with whining and dining and you've really got something.
Oh my goodness. Okay. You're a mess.
That was good. I liked it, though.
Yeah.
Walked me right into it. Now, you didn't even know that's what I was going to go with, but I was going to get you one way or another. All right. So, would you like to do a little small talk first, or would you like to get into your testimony?
What small talk do you have for me?
I don't know. How have you been doing lately?
Well, let's see. We've had a good day today, I would say. It's been all right.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, that one little hiccup, but everything else seems to be going fine.
Yeah. So can't complain about it.
Well,
Could complain about other things, but we're not going to get into those.
You could. Like I tell everybody, you could complain. I'm not sure it does much good, but you could.
It's not really small talk material.
Oh, well, not that. I was just saying other stuff. But having said that, the garlic bread turned out really good. I tried both.
Yeah.
I tried both. They both turned out real good.
Did.
Yeah, well, I told Jack I gotta make sure it's not poison. I test all the kids' foods. Like, why not? It's a job of a dad.
That's the dad way.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, go ahead. Question number 1 for you, Miss Rebekah. You have to do 5. We'll start with number 1.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you go ahead and briefly tell me your testimony? We're going to go ahead and stop once you get to where you and I meet, because you and I will just do a combined one later where we both do it after I do mine. But for now, just go ahead and tell me yours up until we meet.
All right. Well, one of the things that, to kind of start off with, you obviously know I'm a big fan of reality TV, unfortunately. But it also is kind of a good example of what my testimony kind of was, through most of my upbringing and such. There was what was real, and then there was the reality TV version. Reality TV is scripted, it's polished, it's
Produced.
just so produced. Yes. So, the reality TV of my upbringing was that I was a second child, and technically third child, but was raised in a 2-parent, 2-child home. Had an older brother. We went to a Christian school. My dad had been prior military, got out when I was very young, and had gone on staff at the local church that we were attending. So we were very immersed in the church. I was considered the nicest girl on the playground. My parents considered me their golden ticket child. I made good grades. I was a cheerleader. I did all of the typical, growing up in the nuclear family kind of style. That is what everyone would have seen on the outside. That is what the reality TV version of my life would be if you just looked at it from that point of view. However, the real version was a little bit different. There was not much I could say up until about the age of about 5 or 6, which is ironically the time when my dad had already gotten out of the military and was transitioning over to start working at the church.
What did he do when he was in the military?
He was an MP and then had switched over from being an MP to being a chaplain's assistant, which I think is probably what kind of started the spark of wanting to go into the ministry. I know that when he was an MP in Germany, he definitely...
So he was in the army, though?
Yes, he was in the Army.
And you say military police officer, but yeah.
Yes.
Well,
sorry.
now
oh,
we
sorry.
can shorten.
Military.
Now we can shorten it to MP. But yes,
sorry,
correct.
MP, military police officer. So he spent a lot of time on patrol. I know he spent time listening to teachings. That kind of sparked it. I think then that's when the chaplain's assistant position came available for him, and that's what he did up until he got out.
Well, and he was in Germany when he had your older brother, but not you?
Yes. Yeah, my older brother was born in Germany. They were then stationed in North Carolina at Bragg, which is where I was born, and he got...
I believe it's Fort Liberty now.
Yes. And he got out there, and we stayed there in Fayetteville. And that is where we lived up until I was about 14, 15 years old.
So now that we're at your dad getting into the ministry, do you want to talk about the other brother or no? Just briefly, or do you talk about it later?
I don't necessarily mention that later.
You want to?
Yes, I do have an older brother as well. He is my biological brother. My parents had him when they were in high school. She decided to give him up for adoption and try to give him a better life in that sense than what she could give him at that time. And I met him in person. I knew about him my whole life. Like I was very young when my parents told me about him, so it was never like unaware of who he was. We didn't necessarily get to talk that much or meet until I was about 11 or 12. I know that they exchanged some photos when I was young, but then we officially talked when I was about 11, 12 years old, I think. And was able to build a good relationship with him, still have a good relationship with him, saw him a couple of times, was at his wedding and all of that, so.
And he's about to have a baby, yeah?
Yes, they're going to have a baby next year. Yes, so that is the older brother situation.
Right, so back to your dad. He's just gotten out of the military. He's now doing chaplain, or he's now he went from being a chaplain's assistant. Now he's...
Yes, now he is getting on staff at our local church. I know he was going to seminary.
Which was? Which church?
Calvary Chapel, Fayetteville. And was...
So that's non-denominational?
Yes. And yeah, so, and was going to seminary and, all of that. So, anyways, at that time though, around 5 or 6 years old is when I kind of have this, this missed year that kind of started off. And during that time, yes, I'll get into it. Hold on. During that time, obviously, I can't necessarily tell you what I was living through during that time. It wasn't until later on in life that I started to realize that there was this, gap year of, no memories really kind of came from this year. And obviously later into an adulthood, I started to remember certain parts of this year. And this year is when I can really kind of definitively say is when my depression started. There was an incident that happened around that time, which, to put it simply, my innocence was sort of just taken advantage of, in a way. And I was also told at that time to be quiet and to not say anything, because you don't want to get in trouble. And this idea, this kind of, not necessarily command, but this whole, whatever you want to call it, this...
Coercion?
Yes, coercion, I guess that was done, was kind of, because I was so young, deep-rooted, this weird, as long as you stay quiet and don't tell anybody, you won't get in trouble. And it also just kind of made me stay quiet about a lot of things in general, because even though at the time it's not that I had necessarily done anything wrong, I was led to believe that I had done something wrong and therefore felt shame over this incident and did not want to repeat it or let anyone know about this. And it weighed heavy on me, especially being that young. And I can remember being told all the time that I was daydreaming during that year. And I would get in trouble a lot at school for daydreaming. And I was just kind of quiet. And because I couldn't tell them what I was daydreaming about. I couldn't necessarily give a reason as to what I was necessarily thinking about. I was just kind of gone, really, not necessarily there. And this darkness kind of just stayed in there for a while. It would mostly be a lot of times at night when you're alone laying in bed, that feeling would kind of creep back in. However, there was also a lot of light in my life. Like I said, based off of the reality TV version, the real aspects of that is that, yes, my dad was on staff at a church. I was going to a Christian school. I was heavily immersed into the into God, and to going to church, and to having a relationship with God, because my dad was in seminary and learning so much. I think that knowledge really spilled over into his everyday with us, and he ended up taking over with the children's ministry, which was obviously where we were at. And most of what my biblical knowledge was taught to me by my father. And my dad loves to go deep into the weeds with things. So I had a great resource of a teacher in him, of whatever he was giving me in the Bible. And I soaked all of that up. And I knew that, I wanted to go into the ministry from a young age. I knew that I had, more of a calling, more of a purpose. And so that light and darkness was already kind of going back and forth inside of me from a very young age. At about 12 years old, though, is when my depression really kind of peaked to a new high that I hadn't ever gotten to before. You're in middle school by this point. I had the typical middle schooler issues. I dealt with.
And you're still going to private school?
Yes, I'm still going to the private Christian school at the time. So I had bullies, I had eating disorders, I had all of this stuff kind of going on. There was the added pressure of the fact, because my school was also connected to my church. People knew my family. People knew that I was a pastor's daughter. People knew, that my parents were on staff and everything.
Did your mom work at the school by then or no?
Yeah, my mom had been already working at the school. When I was either in 3rd or 4th grade is when she officially got on staff at the school. By the time I was in 5th to 6th grade, she was working in the actual office, and she was a very well-known person at the school. And, I had an older brother as well at the school who was a very charismatic individual. People loved him just by being around him. And so people knew me.
And he played sports and everything else.
Yes, and he played sports. Like I said, I was a cheerleader. I was also in band and involved in other things, and would get myself involved in pretty much anything I could possibly get involved in.
Is it true that he once did gymnastics?
We don't need to get into the gymnastics. We got in trouble for mentioning that. Goodness. Anyways.
That's more embarrassing for him than it is for you.
Anyways. Point is, I
joke, of course. Love you, Nene.
At about 12, though, like I said, the depression had peaked to a new high in the sense of self-harm. The starving myself, physically actually hitting myself, and, of course, then also what came with that was also the suicidal thoughts. This darkness that was in me had now developed a voice. That voice had taken on the voice of the bullies that were around me, any of the negative feelings that I felt towards trying to live up to this standard that I didn't think I could necessarily reach. Like I said, my parents used to call me the golden ticket. They're their good child or whatever, because I had good grades and I was involved in things and I didn't get in trouble and I stayed quiet and all of that. Um, but in reality, in my not in reality TV, but in reality of what I felt, I didn't feel like I was ever actually living up to these standards because I was having all of these issues internally. And not to mention, like I said, the bullies in my life, definitely like that voice grabbed onto those statements that they would say, things of you're fat, you're ugly, you're stupid. I believed all of those
Or
things.
even comments about, like, while you're eating food, about how much you were eating or what type of food you were eating.
Any of those things, any of the comments even about just what you were wearing, anything like that. Like, there was always this feeling just that you just weren't ever good enough and that I wasn't ever living up to this standard. And it would torment me endlessly. And like I said, the worst times that it would get would be when I would be alone at night trying to go to sleep. This feeling would just it would be basically a physically loud voice in my head that would actually cause me to have a headache, like physical pain. And I can remember at about 12 years old, I think I had gotten into a fight with my brother that night. I was stressed out with everything that my 12-year-old life had going on with it at the time. I know my parents weren't home and they were either at like a meeting for church or something along those lines. And basically, I can remember being in my room and thinking in my head, I could just go into the kitchen and grab a knife and just slit my wrist and just be done. And no one would really care about that. And I sat there, and because like I said, like there was still this light inside that was like, no, that's wrong. You don't need, like, don't do things like that. And so this battle went back and forth until finally I sat up in bed and was going to get up and go to the kitchen. And right about that time, my parents' headlights came in through my window and they were home. And so I knew at that point, like, I didn't have an option to do this anymore. And obviously, like, that was God stepping in at that point. And so then, like, we just shoved the feelings back down. It was only 2 years later that we ended up moving to Alabama, but those 2 years that I had left in Fayetteville, I was up and down. I wasn't ever happy, and I knew that, like, I wasn't going to be able to stay there for long, which was really ironic that we ended up moving 2 years later. But, like, I can remember even that last year being in Fayetteville, once even knowing that we were going to be moving, that, like, I could not wait to get out of there because I was genuinely tormented by being in that area. And so we left and we moved to Alabama. And at the time, I was a freshman in high school, so going into my sophomore year. My brother had been a junior who was going to be going into a senior year. And so he had made a plan with my parents to stay back in Fayetteville to finish out his senior year so he could graduate with all of his friends. And he was going to be living with a family friend at that time up there. And then my parents and I were going to be moving to Alabama by ourselves instead. And so that summer, because we moved right after the school year ended, and I had this crazy kind of experience that summer. I remember when we had first got to Alabama, we were unpacking books and everything, and my mom had started unpacking some Bible studies that she had already done, and so she like had come into my room and like handed me a couple of them, and said like, oh, these might be ones that you might want to look at eventually one day, like, whatever you want to do. And one specifically, like I can remember, like I always seen this one on her bookshelf growing up and always wanting to read it, and for whatever reason something compelled me to read that book that night. And I remember I read it all from front to back in one night, and I even still have it and still have the little pieces of paper that I journaled on throughout that whole night writing in this book. They're all in there with it all, and I had this amazing experience of digging into like not even just necessarily God, but more digging into like me personally and how I felt towards God, which, I didn't necessarily ever do that per se throughout the first 14 years. I had a knowledge that I had a yearning for more knowledge and wanting to have more biblical knowledge and understanding all of the books and understanding the general like not necessarily storyline, I don't want to say it like that, but understanding like the Bible and what all was actually in it, but hadn't ever really like gotten real deep and personal with my relationship with God. And I had different dreams in life, but mostly like I didn't necessarily have a career path I wanted. I wanted to be a mom. That was always what I wanted. I just wanted to get married and be a mom, and I would be happy with that. But the other only dream I really had was writing, and I love to write. My second grade teacher kind of started that love for me, and I journaled constantly. And so that summer was the first time I could remember hearing from God and hearing him tell me that I was going to write a book one day, and that that's what I needed to do, and that I needed to just be writing down what was going on in my life and what was happening. And I kind of remember thinking, well, I mean, I haven't necessarily lived through that much to write a book about it, but like, I guess I do have some things to say. And then I also remember feeling very much inadequate and like I had no words to put down on paper because I was just so young at that time. And despite the fact that I was having this like wonderful experience and everything with God, there was still also this depression that kept creeping in. Like, I remember after leaving Fayetteville and being like ready to be gone and being happy to be somewhere new where I felt like I could breathe again and start over again. And yet then after being there for a while there and like, my parents were very nervous to put me into public school. I had only ever been in a private school. There was no real private school in the area, nor could they necessarily afford to do that anymore. So they just were like, well, we're just going to homeschool and you can just be at home. But I was in a new place where I knew no one, and this loneliness definitely set in.
Homeschooled.
Stop it. This loneliness definitely started to set in instead. But there were so many amazing things that God was doing in my parents' life specifically at this time. Like I said, we had moved to Alabama because my dad had been called to start a church there in Alabama. And he, was able to start a coffee shop and start a church. And it was all God who did all of that. And it was incredible to watch and see happen. And So there was this definite, like, that light that was inside was like a lot brighter during this time versus the darkness and depression. Despite the fact that it was still there, it was very much like I had kind of like seesaw day experiences. Like, I would have these great highs and great lows throughout the day, because I would see this, I would see what all he was doing in my parents' lives. And this is all from like 15, 16, 17, and everything. And like I said, like, I had also even had that experience with God too. So I knew that he was going to be doing something with my life as well. And so I remember I wrote down here, like, there was like two voices, and it's almost like the two angels on your shoulders, except I can like remember feeling like there was the one voice in my head that was the one that would actually like cause me actual pain, and headaches, and then there was the voice that was in my heart, which again would cause me a physical soothing feeling, and like I would just be battling back and forth with those two. A few months before I turned 18.
You don't want to make any jokes about Emperor's New Groove. Nothing?
Do you have a joke you'd like to make?
No, you're fine. Look what I can do. Ah! I don't see how that's... No. He's got a point.
Don't worry, I'll put the memes up for you.
You're silly.
Anyways, okay, so a few months before I turned 18, life started to get really complicated. I had a serious boyfriend who I was technically engaged to, was planning on marrying, who I just knew that wasn't the right situation and that I wasn't supposed to do that anymore. And had, I was still a senior in high school at this time as well. So I'd broken that off, ended up starting a different relationship with somebody who, did not necessarily share the same morals and values per se as me. And I just started to kind of spiral out of control. I was dating this guy. We were going back and forth in our relationship where we'd be dating and then not dating. By the time I turned 18, I decided to lose my virginity to said individual. And then we had broken up again. And that, like, again, the back and forth, the doing things that I shouldn't have been doing, led all of my seesawing into very much a one-way road that was heavily on one side. It basically all spiraled down into one evening in which my depression had taken over. The voice inside my head was much louder than any voice that could come out of my heart anymore. I had no more hope. I had no more wanting to go on. I had been through enough. I couldn't take any more of what I was going through. And I shoved a bottle of pills in my mouth. And then I went to bed. And nothing happened. And I woke up the next day. And instead of seeing the miracle that I now can see as to what happened that night, I was even more depressed and more upset because I felt that I was dumb and didn't even know how to do it, basically. Because that's just how loud the voice was. My parents eventually found out about that. And honestly, it was probably harder for them to kind of go through, because at that point I was 18, and now telling them that, hey, I've been depressed since I was 5 and actually attempted to kill myself and nothing happened, and I still don't feel great about things. But at the same time, I also couldn't necessarily get that point across to them. They knew, but I wouldn't talk more to them than telling them basically what had happened. And I don't think that they knew really what to do for me, because I also wouldn't tell them what to do, because I didn't know what I needed or what to do. Basically, I was just kind of at a loss of where to do with my life, as where I was at. And it wasn't getting any better. From there, I just got worse. And my parents wanted to help me, obviously. I know that they wanted to, but I didn't necessarily want to accept the help that they were offering, and didn't want to talk to them about it. Didn't think that they necessarily understood where I was at, and I just chose instead to live in my sin versus doing what even I knew I should have been doing instead. And so I left. I went and applied for a 4-year college so that I could move away and get away and be able to live in my sin and not be judged, essentially. But and once again thought, well, I also had this thought of, I moved once and felt better after moving. Like, maybe if I move again, I'll feel better after moving. But it wasn't better. If anything, it just allowed me to let that darkness and let that other voice take over even more. And at this point, since I was being a lot more, what's the word? Complacive? Is that the word I'm looking for? With the I'm just going ahead and living in my sin. It wasn't necessarily, there was this
compliance.
Yes, I was more compliant, but that's what I was trying to say. But there was this weird sense of euphoria that I was feeling, obviously living in my sin, because sin does feel good in the moment. But at the same time, that knowledge, that biblical knowledge base that I had, still crept up all the time to make sure that I felt the guilt for everything I was doing afterwards as well. And that became the new seesaw that I was on of, instead of the good days being the days that I was seeing God work in my life, and the bad days being the days that, the darkness was taking over. It was, the good days were the days that I was just living in my sin, and the bad days were the days that I was feeling the weight of the consequences that I had made. And at 19, living on my own, I was going to attempt to kill myself again. I drove to the store. I bought another bottle. I left the store. I then ended up getting a phone call from a friend, and I am just one of those people who always answers her phone and always answers every text, and so I answered the phone anyways, because even though knowing that I didn't necessarily want to talk to this person.
We seem to be a little bit different on that one.
Yes, we are. That's why we had issues communicating, but we won't get into those things at this present moment in time. Point is, I answered the phone, and I remember this person asking me how I was doing. And for whatever reason, I just decided to tell them exactly how I was doing. And obviously, I didn't do anything again that night. I was on the phone with my friend. They helped me through that. And then I, continued on back into my seesaw of a life. that I kept living. And like I knew that something needed to change because, like I said again, I was definitely just living in my sin at this time. I was not doing anything that I was supposed to be doing. I was doing everything that I knew I was not supposed to be doing. And like I said, I had these two realities once again that I had created, even amongst people who wouldn't have judged me per se, necessarily on like what my life decisions were, but I had what I would like to call the pastor's daughter, but like the worldview of the pastor's daughter. So I was this girl who was questioning her beliefs, and I was acting out because it was a rite of passage essentially to be a pastor's daughter who had walked away, and I was just being who the world expected a pastor's daughter to be at that point.
Do you think you were using that more as like an excuse to act that way too?
I probably, I knew others who were also pastors' kids.
Well, it's almost like having a free pass to
yes,
like act out.
It was almost like, oh, what's your crutch? Well, I'm a pastor's kid. Oh, well, we know why you're here, and it's like this, essentially this excuse slash also almost
You need a shadow to blame.
Yes, this personality that I could put on that, it was always the fun thing to do at the parties was be like, oh, Becca, she's the pastor's daughter. And to see me over there, doing whatever debauchery I was doing at the time. But again, there was still also, though, this other side that even my party friends, like I said, who wouldn't have judged me per se, but I wasn't going to allow them to see this side of me that was hurting and shoving my feelings aside because who wants to be the dramatic and damaged one? And constantly disappointed in myself and my decisions and everything that I was doing because I knew better. And it all kind of came to a peak when basically financially there was no way that I was going to be able to continue to live the life that I was living. And so I did what any broke person did, and I moved back in with my parents.
What college were you going to?
I was going to Auburn University.
War Eagle.
Anyways.
And were you working while you were up there, right?
Yes, I at one point was working 2 jobs and going to school. I cut back on one of those jobs and was just working 1 job full time and also going to school. And then ended up dropping out of school and was just working full time. But, when you use loans or financial aid, they eventually want you to pay that money back. And you can't sometimes go back to school until you've paid off certain financial aid. So,
did you ever meet Cam Newton?
So side quick note, I'm not sure. I never met him. However, there was an incident one day in which there was a Cam like Newton person who walked by in front of me at school.
And he did happen to be on campus that day.
And he did happen to be on campus that day. And, kept walking. Didn't necessarily see his face or anything, but was definitely like, who was that? And then heard somebody be like, oh, that was Cam Newton. So he's walked by me.
Fair enough.
Possibly. Disclaimer, might not have happened. Who knows?
How do you feel about Auburn football this year?
We're not getting into Auburn football right now.
Okay. Looking forward to basketball season. Got it. So, we're leaving Auburn at this time. What year is this?
This is 2013. This is about April time of 2013.
Okay. April 13, and you're moving back down in with your
With the
parents.
parents.
Do you want to continue, or do you want me to ask my next question? Because I don't know if you're going to answer it, but when you continue. But
You can go
how did your parents feel about this?
So ironically, my parents were actually overjoyed when I told them that I was moving back home.
Interesting.
Yes, they.
So 2013, you're 20, right?
I haven't turned 20 yet. I'm still 19 because my birthday's in June.
Yeah. And they're overjoyed to have you back.
They are. My parents were not happy about my decision to go to Auburn. That's not what they wanted me to go do.
Yeah.
They were not happy about my living arrangements in Auburn. They weren't happy about the fact that I wouldn't talk to them or communicate with them really much when I was in Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that they were happy that I was coming back home, and I'm sure that they felt like they could help me get back to a better state. Because again, I did come home and visit them during my time when I was in Auburn. They did see me, and I know that every time that they did,
And home is Forerunner. Well,
yeah,
Enterprise.
Enterprise, yeah. Every time that they did, I knew that they knew that I was not doing what I was supposed to be doing, but that I also wasn't living under their roof, so they didn't necessarily feel like they could have much control over whether or not I was going to listen to what they wanted me to be doing.
Is it true they referred to this time as the dark days?
Yes, my time in Auburn, my mother refers to as my dark days.
So now you're coming back to Enterprise. You're going to live with your parents. You're going to work at the coffee shop?
Yes, I'm... my mom decides to inform me that she is pregnant.
Can we give a shout out to Boldly Going? That's a fun name for a coffee shop if they're an Enterprise. You're boldly going.
It is. It was a
clever,
very well named.
Clever little Star Trek pun.
He did a good job, that guy. However, it also backfired on him because he did get some negative reviews when people walked in and there was no Star Trek anymore.
Yeah.
People were very bummed.
You gotta expect at least something. A Leonard Nimoy cutout, a William Shatner somewhere.
Just maybe one
Patrick
of the Lego
anything,
Star Trek set up in the corner there.
Or the occasional Will Wheaton visit.
Does he make visits there? Anyways, okay.
Maybe.
Getting distracted.
You moved back there.
So my mom was pregnant with my little brother, and
she's got to be pretty old by then.
That was rude.
No, but I'm just saying, if you are now 20, that's kind of a big gap.
Parents. She's only, I think she was either 42 or 43.
I mean, that's a lot different age gap than when you were born at 20. I imagine that her parenting styles must have been a little bit different.
Oh, well, yes, I'm sure they were different, but especially since they were in a completely different environment and everything.
We'll get to that in a minute. Go ahead, finish. Sorry, I don't mean to keep interrupting.
Point is, so my mom was pregnant. My dad was wanting more help at the coffee shop so that he could be there more for my mom. I had a previous job in Enterprise at a day spa, and they were willing to also take me back on staff there. And my main goal was just to come back and make money to pay off my it wasn't quite my student loan specifically, it was my financial aid had to be returned, so I had to pay that back to Auburn before I could ever enroll again in school. And so I was moving back with the sole purpose of just trying to pay off my debt so that I could go back to school again. And I knew that I could do that better in Enterprise, where I wasn't going to have to pay rent and live with my parents instead. Then I could do that in Auburn. And even when I left Auburn with the intention of going back. But shortly after getting back to Enterprise, knew that I was never going to go back and was just going to find a different path instead.
Did you start going to college right then or not yet?
No, I had to spend some time first paying off my my debt first to Auburn. It was a couple $1,000s. So that had to get paid first. Which, again, luckily, because of the situation I was in, I was able to work a lot and make quite a bit back. So it didn't take me long, only about a year or so to pay that off and get that done. But because I had moved back in with my parents, though, who again have a church and are still being pastor and all of that, I now had this other third persona that had to come out, which was the other version of the pastor's daughter, which is the good girl version when you're at church.
We call that the Sunday school version.
Or the Sunday school version. Yeah, sure, that could be a good label for it as well.
Yeah, or him too. Could be Jesus.
But so, because I moved back in with my parents to start over. However, I still wanted to live in my sin and still wanted to have my bad girl side of me, per se. So there was, as I put down here, the bad girl, the good girl, and the sad girl. Who was...
But not a 6 Cebu, a sad Cebu, and a mute Cebu?
No, we got bad, good, and sad. So, because, like, again, I had moved back in with my parents. I was back immersed into this lifestyle again that they had created. And, I was back into this. I do need to rebuild my relationship with God. I do need to get back to living, I'm at this point, 19, almost 20. Like, it's been 5 years since He has told me what my purpose is in life and what I'm meant to be doing. And I wanted to get back to that version of me. However, I was also still haunted by all of the decisions that I had made in the last 2 years. I was upset by all of the mistakes that I had made, and those weighed on me constantly. And I would sit there and try to tell myself that I could do better, and all of my mistakes would come back and hit me in the face and tell me there's no way you're going to do any better than this. You have messed up way too far. And so I would just choose to believe that voice instead. And so I wouldn't do better, and I would just go back to living in my sin. And I wrestled with this constantly. This constantly is what brought my depression up and down. I can remember even at this point in time, my methods of self-harm was driving really fast on back roads, hoping for my car to crash. And there's so much more that I could obviously get into with all of this, because right about this time is, like I said, after turning 20, obviously that fall is when I met you. And we're going to pause it off there with where my story is at. But looking back at all of this now, I can genuinely say that, clearly what I was experiencing, this depression, or as you like to refer to it as oppression, was definitely spiritual warfare throughout my life. I knew what my purpose was. I knew what God had called me to do. However, my demons had been around for a very long time, and they knew me very well. And they knew how to stop and hinder me at any possible points. And they would, constantly bring up anything that they could, the personal details even back when I was in Auburn, I still would have the voices of the bully from middle school come back into my mind. I would still have, old experiences with my different eating disorders or different other things come back to mind. I still would try to starve myself to make myself feel better. I constantly would go back and forth on these ups and downs. And whenever I would start fighting back harder throughout my life is when the attacks would come harder. I think there was a brief time I felt like that it had kind of subsided. I thought I was doing better. And I think then it was just building up to just come back even harder, because when my life started spiraling out at 18, those attacks were 10 times harder than the attacks that I experienced when I was in middle school. But I also, now have also learned from all of this. One of the things that I think is the reason why I keep going back and forth through this is because I know that my testimony is worth being out there and being told. I know that there are people who struggle with this issue. Depression and suicide is a very real thing today. And the age in which it is coming into play with kids is younger and younger, especially the suicidal aspects of it. I was 11 or 12, which is around the same age as the local girl from here.
There's 2 local girls from here. There's one in Ocean Springs, and there's another one that was just up in above Diamond Head.
But I know of stories of even younger kids who have done so.
I think both of those were 10 or 11. I can't remember.
And the fact that I have, by 15, I had already dealt with that on a maybe more minimal level than some other kids had. But at the same time, I had already dealt with that and knew that that was my struggle and that this was the issue. And I think the attacks come because they don't want this issue solved. They don't want people to speak out about this, for people to come to some sort of way of fixing this. Like, how do you go about fixing this? It's obviously just being able to have open conversations, being able to talk about it more, being able to know that you're not alone in this, that other people are also going through this, even if you don't think that they are, because they have put up their own reality TV show for you to watch of their life instead.
Like that AJR song you love.
I do love that Pretender song. It's a good song. And I resonate with that idea because I was a great pretender throughout most of my life. I'm sure people who knew me back in Fayetteville, or people who even knew me in Auburn or anything like that, would have told you that I was just some fun-loving, sweet girl. She's real nice.
I mean, you are sweet and you are nice.
I mean, those are, but they don't know.
Yeah, they don't know what's going on.
They don't know the actual details of my, they don't know the darkness that comes out, and those demons that are around, and yeah, but again, it still is a process. I've said that to my mom before, that I think that I'll struggle with this forever, and it's not because I don't think that God can get me out of this depression. It's because I now know that this is just spiritual warfare. Mm-hmm. And it makes it easier sometimes to deal with the attacks. I mean, they're still not any easier. They're still just as hard as they are the days before. But being able to, I think your sister said this in her testimony podcast, being able to put a name on it and being able to label it, so that way that this is not.
Well, when you know how to counter it and you know how to fight it. If you don't know what you're fighting, how can you know how to fight it? Mm-hmm. And the minute you realize it's spiritual warfare, you realize, okay, well, if I just keep going forward,
I just have to keep attacking.
Yeah, what's it going to do?
I just have to keep going. Yeah. And
because if I stop, it wins.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And obviously...
And it wants you to stop, because then, it's the easiest thing in the world to fight against somebody if they won't even fight back.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then, and the other obvious, not always to keep fighting, but one of the ways of keeping fighting is... every time I would go back and immerse myself back into God again, and immerse myself back into that safe place that I had with my parents, which was that Christian home, that Christian environment, that God-loving environment that I had been raised in. That is how I combat it today. I turn on the praise and worship music, or turn on with the kids, turn on Veggie Tales, turn on whatever can get us back into a good, solid place. I love it when we turn on the worship music and the kids start dancing around the kitchen. Like, that's honestly that is the number one, what always gets me out of any of my depressive episodes that will happen now, which I know, again, like, are just spiritual attacks. But yeah, we'll leave it off at that because, like I said, the rest of it is...
Before we go past that, I thought, like, it's interesting that you brought up that you were struggling with stuff when it started when you were like 10 or 11, same with these other girls. But yet at the same time, one of the things you were being told back then was that you were too young to do anything.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, you're not too young to get attacked, but you are too young to do something.
Well, yeah, and even then, it would be ironic because I would have, we have a vast biblical knowledge at this point, because of how immersed we were and how much my dad would teach me. So, I know all of the verses that would come out of, do not let them look down on you because you are young, would set but be an example for the believers and stuff. And, I held on to that verse for a very long time. And even then would have people in the church who would even tell me then that I was too young to do something and everything. And would sit there and be like, First Timothy, what you got for me on that one? But
didn't Jack just say that the other day too? He was like, remember, Dad, little guys can do big things too. Remember the Veggie Tales where David has to fight Goliath.
He did, and I think it was over something minimal like walking the dog even. It was like...
He's silly. Next. Which woman of faith from the Bible do you think would be your favorite and or you would identify with the most or resonate with or look up to?
Well, if you don't know our daughter's name, obviously that is a dead giveaway as to which woman in the Bible
So Princess Noelani is in a very good book, but I don't think that book is the Bible.
That's not our daughter's name. Our daughter's name is Esther.
Oh, well, they both are her name.
Yes.
And they both are princesses. Look at that. Esther's a girl who becomes queen.
Okay. Yes.
Why Esther?
Esther is a lot of things to me. Esther is who I wished I had been at times. She spoke out during a time in which she knew speaking out could cost her her life. And, she saved her people for that. She was called to something that I don't think she would have necessarily chosen for herself. However, at the same time, I'm sure that there was almost an internal battle in Esther because despite not necessarily being called to this life of being queen and everything, I'm sure she loved her husband. I'm sure she loved her life. And I'm sure there was a part of her that desperately did not want to lose that. And very much could have just kept quiet. And she wouldn't have gotten in trouble. However, she didn't choose to stay quiet. She chose to speak out. She chose to risk her life. And she saved her people from it. And, we gave that name to our daughter because I pray that my daughter speaks out.
Will be bold?
Is bold.
Oh, good. How'd that work out?
Wild and crazy.
How'd that work out for you?
She's exactly what I wanted and more. And she's, there's also the verse from Esther, which speaks a lot to me, which, I'm gonna just butcher this real quick, but you were so the verse from Esther is Esther 4:14, and I'll just go ahead and read it out, but it is, For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this.
I know you love that one.
And I do love that verse because I do resonate a lot with that verse. I do think that I had to live through the experiences that I lived through, because I do think that this issue that I went through is such an important issue. I think it is such a problem with our youth and our generation. It's only getting worse as we get older. And people don't know necessarily how to combat it. People don't know necessarily how to fix it. And obviously one of the things that you need to do is speak up. And in that verse, it's interesting just because of the fact that they do say, that deliverance for the Jews would come another way should she not, but that her family would perish if she doesn't speak out at this time. And I think specifically because he did call me and he did tell me what I needed to do, that has always weighed on me, that if I don't do what I'm told to do, I was put on this earth for such a time as this.
Well, and he's always going to get his will accomplished. So whether that's with you, no matter how inadequate you feel, or without you using somebody else, just like with, Deborah and Barack, when, hey, because he was being a little bit scared, now somebody else got to do it, but God was still going to find a way to do it. You can't fail with God. You can, because you have free will, choose to not do that, but he still knows your path from the beginning to end, gives you opportunities, knowing that he's still going to get his will accomplished regardless. Having said that, I'm realizing I want to save the question about your mom and my mom for once we do the next one, because it's going to be more applicable with babies and with mom. But I just also wanted to point out, when I said your mom was old, I didn't mean old. I just meant like the same way when you see someone who walks in and it's like you're 6'4", you're like, that's quite tall, yes? You're not being like, that's tall. Or like, ew, that's tall. You're just like, oh, it's tall. And it's like, compared to what? That's not...
I'm supposed to leave this in.
But yes. That's not tall compared to like Yao Ming. But compared to little people, that's tall. And so like, compared to how young she was when she had her first baby, relative to how old she was when she had the second one, that's fairly old. And a bit of a gap in time. Compared to like someone who's 90, like, no, it's not old. She was still a little spring chicken. Still is. Still a dynamo.
Oh gosh. I'm sorry, Mom.
With that being said, your bonus Jonas question. Are you ready? Because you already touched on it slightly. And I already know the answer here. And so that's why you're just going to get a caveat on it. Excluding Lord of the Beans, what is your favorite VeggieTales? I know. That's why I had to exclude Lord of the Beans, because I knew that was going to be too easy for you.
Esther.
Esther?
I love Esther.
I know you do. But, okay. Well, but it doesn't even have a silly song. No, there is no silly song in the Esther VeggieTales. You get the puppies song when they're doing their auditioning, and then you get her little song that she sings. But that's not really... You get like 30 seconds of puppies are cuddly, puppies are cute. Like, that's...
Is there really no silly song?
There's no silly song in Esther. How sure am I? I don't know. I'm usually pretty good at this.
Hold on.
I mean, I haven't looked it up, but To the best of my knowledge.
He said, I haven't looked it up.
I'm pretty good at knowing this. It's the other one that also doesn't have a silly song is, I think, when they get stranded on the island, which is God Wants Me to Forgive Them, I think. And that one, they have the Forget-O-Matic infomercial instead, where you get forgiven. And that they don't have a silly song in that one either. And again, you're asking me to dive back into, quite a little bit here. I'm trying to think. You know how many VeggieTales there are? Granted, I watch them a lot with the kids, but not Esther. We don't really watch that one that much because there's no silly song. There's just the puppy song.
I mean, I just can't find an answer for it one way or another.
Oh, no, I can tell you. That is the answer.
Lost Puppies is...
Yeah, puppies are cuddly. Puppies are cute. I'd give a home to all the lost puppies. Yes, we already know.
But I guess no one has actually asked.
There's no silly song in it.
Okay, well.
Yeah, there's no silly songs with Larry. The part of the show where Larry comes out
Was
and
that
sings
really my bonus question?
a silly song. It says, bonus question, VeggieTales. No Lord of the Rings.
Poor Natalie.
No Lord of the Rings. Favorite question.
I got off easy with this question.
No, I thought it'd be a bit of a thinker for you because I excluded Lord of the Rings. You weren't allowed to use it. Or Lord of the Beans.
I guess you didn't think of Esther.
Nope. But there's no silly song in it, so who thinks of Esther?
It was my favorite. Still is.
Man.